Hello friends, welcome to my channel Explore with Joyita. The RMS Titanic, a luxury steamship, sank in the early hours of April 15 in 1912 off the coast of Newfoundland in the North Atlantic after sideswiping an iceberg during its maiden voyage. Of the 2,240 passengers and crew on board, more than 1,500 lost their lives in the disaster. Titanic has inspired 1,000 books, articles and films. So friends, today my video is about the Titanic and the causes for this disaster. Before moving on to the video, I request you to subscribe my channel and don't forget to like and share. Now let's move on. The Titanic was the product of intense competition among rival shipping lines in the first half of the 20th century. In particular, the White Star Line found itself in a battle for steamship primacy with Cunard, a venerable British firm with two standout ships that ranked among the most sophisticated and luxurious of their time. J. Bruce Ismay, chief executive of White Star, discussed the construction of three large ships with William J. Pirrie, chairman of shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff, part of a new Olympic class of liners. Each ship would measure 882 feet in length and 92.5 feet at their broadest point, making them the largest of their time. In March 1909, work began at the massive Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, on the second of these three ocean liners, Titanic, and continued non-stop for 2 years. On May 31, 1911, Titanic's immense hull, the largest movable man-made object in the world at the time, made its way down the slipways and into the River Lagan in Belfast. More than 100,000 people attended the launching, which took just over a minute and went off without a hitch. The hull was immediately towed to a mammoth fitting out dock where thousands of workers would spend most of the next year building the ship's decks, constructing her lavish interiors and installing the 29 giant boilers that would power her two main steam engines. The Titanic, for instance, had an electrical control panel that was 30 to 40 feet long. The panel controlled all of the fans, generators and lighting on the ship. It also controlled the condensers that turned steam back into water, along with a few machines that took salt out of ocean water to make it drinkable. The electrical control panel to us would seem enormous, complicated and wasteful. Travers, a self-styled maritime historian who focuses his research on the Titanic, said, "It would be pretty primitive today. A simple desktop computer could handle everything that was down on her massive control panel." The Titanic also had a master and slave setup for all of the clocks on board. The central clock was on the bridge, and as the captain adjusted the time on that one clock, all the clocks on the ship would register the change as the ship sailed through different time zones. There also were 4 elevators on the Titanic, which was fairly new technology on a ship. A few first-class cabins also had telephones, although the phone could not make ship-to-shore calls. The crowning technical glory on the Titanic was the advanced wireless communications set up for Morse code, which was considered the most powerful setup in use at the time. The main transmitter was housed in what was dubbed the Marconi room, named after Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi, who was known as the father of long-distance radio transmissions. The transmitter's antenna was strung between the ship's masts some 250 feet above the ocean's surface. Most ships of the day could transmit messages a distance of 100 to 150 miles during the day, according to Travers, a contributor to the Titanic Commutator, the Titanic Historical Society's magazine. However, the Titanic's wireless system was capable of transmitting messages for 500 miles during the day and 2,000 miles at night. They had the very best, the very latest in wireless equipment, Strover said. There were only 2 wireless operators on board, both young men. They were the computer geeks of the day. If you were a passenger in either first or second class, you could go on the boat deck. This was the highest deck on board. Here you could walk around, play games, or relax on the benches. The lifeboats were also stored on this deck. The ship had 10 decks in total. The Ritz Hotel in London was the inspiration for the lavish interiors of the ship. One of the most famous interiors on the Titanic was an intricate oak staircase with a glass dome overhead, which descended down 7 of the ship's 10 decks to first-class dining room. There are no known photos of the Titanic's grand staircase, but it would have been nearly identical to the first-class grand staircase of Titanic's sister ship, RMS Olympic, for reference. There were separate dining rooms for passengers in first, second, and third class. The luxury of your dining room and the quality of the food differed depending on what class you were in. Do you know, one of the things found on the Titanic was a menu of the last meal served to a first-class passenger. The menu went to auction in 2012, selling for $83,000. Passengers also had access to 2 libraries, a gym with state-of-the-art equipment, a swimming pool, 2 barbers shop, opulent Turkish baths, and a squash court. Being able to use these facilities also depended entirely on which class tickets the passengers had. There were around 900 men and women crew members on board the Titanic, including the captain, Edward John Smith, officers and deckhands. The crew had jobs in all areas of the boat, as well as those specifically looking after the operation of the ship. There were also waiters, cooks, cleaners, shop assistants, hairdressers, plus those who worked in the boiler rooms, stoking the fires with a ton of coal every 2 minutes to produce enough steam to power the ship. The 2 youngest crew members were just 14 years old. Frederick William Hopkins, a plate steward, and William Albert Watson, a bellboy. Both lost their lives in the tragedy. The unsinkable Titanic was sunk by an iceberg. But there are other reasons why the tragedy that occurred 100 years ago was as tragic as it was. Even a century later, the case of the Titanic illustrates how technological failures often result from a succession of omissions, mistakes, and bad luck rather than one big mess up. Tide sent icebergs southwards. Astronomers at Texas State University at San Marcos noted that the sun, the moon, and earth were aligned in such a way that could have led to unusually high tides in January 1912. They speculated that the tides could have dislodged icebergs that were stuck in the Labrador Sea, sending more of them towards the water traversed by the Titanic a couple of months later. The ship was going too fast. Many Titanicologists have said that the ship's captain, Edward J. Smith, was aiming to better the crossing time of the Olympic, the Titanic's older sibling in the White Star Fleet. For some, the fact that the Titanic was sailing full speed ahead despite concerns about iceberg was Smith's biggest mistake. Iceberg warnings went unheeded. The Titanic received multiple warnings about ice fields in the North Atlantic over the wireless. The last and the most specific warning was not passed along by the senior radio operator Jack Phillips to Captain Smith, apparently because it didn't carry the prefix MSG, which meant Master Service Gram. That would have required a personal acknowledgement from the captain. Phillips interpreted it as non-urgent and returned to sending passenger messages to the receiver on shore at Cape Race, Newfoundland, before it went out of range. The binoculars were locked up. The binoculars that could have been used by the lookouts on the night of the collision were locked up aboard the ship, and the key was held by David Blair, an officer who was bumped from the crew before the ship's departure from Southampton. Some historians have speculated that the fatal iceberg might have been spotted earlier if the binoculars were in use, but others say it wouldn't have made a difference. The steersman took a wrong turn. Did the Titanic steersman turn the ship towards the iceberg, dooming the ship? That's the claim made in 2010 by Louise Patton, who said the story was passed down from her grandfather, the most senior ship officer to survive the disaster. After the iceberg was spotted, the command was issued to turn hard as starboard, but as the command was passed down the line, it was misinterpreted as meaning make the ship turn right rather than push the tiller right to make the ship head left, Patton said. She said the error was quickly discovered but not quickly enough to avert the collision. She also speculated that if the ship had stopped where it was hit, seawater would not have pushed into one interior compartment after another as it did, and the ship might not have sunk as quickly. The iron rivets were too weak. Metallurgists Tim Falk and Jennifer Hooper McCarthy looked into the materials used for building of the Titanic at its Belfast shipyard and found that the steel plates towards the bow and the stern were held together with low-grade iron rivets. Those rivets may have been used because higher-grade rivets were in short supply or because the better rivets couldn't be inserted in those areas using the shipyard's crane-mounted hydraulic equipment. The metallurgist said these low-grade rivets would have ripped apart more easily during the collision, causing the ship to sink more quickly than it would have if stronger rivets had been used. Other researchers have contested the claim, however. There were too few lifeboats. Perhaps the biggest tragedy is that there were not enough lifeboats to accommodate all of the Titanic's more than 2,200 passengers and crew members. The lifeboats could accommodate only about 1,200 people, which was still in excess of the 1,060% capacity that was the legal requirement for that time. It seems that in 1912, in a way not dissimilar to our own box-ticking, responsibility-avoiding culture today, lack of effective oversight on the part of the authorities caused the consequences of disaster to be much worse than they might have been. So friends, this was my video today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Do comment and let me know how this video was. Thank you. Bye bye.